Welcome to the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security and international affairs. We have 5 master's degree programs, 18 certificates of study, and a new doctoral program. We also offer the opportunity to take a single course without having to pay an entire semester's worth of tuition cost. One can also audit such a course at a much less cost. If you are interested in learning more about us, please feel free to speak to one of our staff at the conclusion of this event. Dr. Shaw Shea is a Senior Research Fellow of the International Policy Institute for Counterterrorism, ICT, and former Director of Research at the Institute for Strategy and Policy at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel. Dr. Shea served in the IDF as a senior officer in the military intelligence, and he was the deputy head of the Israeli National Security Council. Dr. Shea is the author and the editor of 20 books. His last books are The Red Sea Region, Between War and Reconciliation, which is available today on our book table, Israel and Islamic Terror Abductions, and Somalia in Transition since 2006. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Thank you. Maybe you can come closer. I think that it's a very intimate group, so I'm not sure that I need the phone. Right? Okay, so I'm going to speak today about the Red Sea region between war and reconciliation. As Hannah mentioned before, it's my latest book. And I'm studying the Red Sea region for more than a decade. And actually, this is my 4th book dealing with the region from different perspectives. The first one was published in 2005. The name of the book was The Terror Triangle of the Red Sea, and according to the name, it was dedicated to the terrorism in this region. And the 2 other books were a kind of zoom in into Somalia. The first one dealt with the history of Somalia till 2006, and the second between 2006 to 2013. In this book, the Red Sea region between war and reconciliation, I try to bring a more comprehensive approach. And when we speak about this region, in most of the cases, if you go to the existing analysis that's relevant to the region, it's either included in what we call Middle Eastern studies, I mean relating to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the rest of the Middle East, or African studies that relate to Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, and so on. I hope that till my end of my presentation, you will be convinced that it's necessary to start to look at this region as a region. And first of all, I hope that it works. When we look at the map, we can understand the geostrategic importance of the Red Sea region. We can see that actually this maritime route is one of the most important to the global trade. And just to give you an impression regarding the figures, 10% of the global maritime trade is crossing this maritime route monthly. About 4% of the world's daily crude oil supply and gas supply is going through this Red Sea region. So I think that from the economic point of view, the importance is clear. And of course, any disruption to the free navigation in this area, of course, affects the global economy. Just to give you an example, let's say 10 years ago, maybe it will sound strange, but the main problem in the region, especially in this area close to the coast of Somalia, were pirates. And it sounds strange, but the fact is that the insurance made, I think, at the height of the pirate attacks, it was almost doubled. And of course, the effect on the global economy is tremendous. Today, this is not the main problem, and I will not relate to it in my presentation, but I just try to give you an idea about the sensitivity of this region. But this is not the only importance. A second geopolitical importance of the region is that some of the great powers, and especially China, considered the Red Sea and the ports of the Red Sea as the gate to Africa. And just to tell you that between 2000 to 2017, China invested in Africa $143 billion, you can understand what is the importance. And it's not surprising that China built its first military base out of the borders of China, where? Not in the South China Sea. Here in Djibouti. Okay? So, already I mentioned two main reasons why this region is so important. The third one, which is not less important, and I will relate to it later in details, we have to take in consideration that this region is a kind of extension for the Middle East, for good and bad. And we can see that all the current conflicts that are going on in the Middle East, we can see the reflection in this area. So if we can say that since 2011, the so-called Arab Spring, I don't know who thought that it really looks like a spring. It's worse than a winter, but anyway, since 2011, when we look at the Middle East, it's an ongoing process of transition. We know what was the starting point. We don't know what will be the final political landscape that will be the result of this process. But what is important to understand is that it's first and above all an inter-Islamic competition. And there are four main forces that are fighting each other for dominance in the region. And the reflection of this conflict we can see as well in the Red Sea region. So what are these four main schools or groups that are fighting each other? First of all, it's Iran and the Shia alliance that includes pro-Iranian parties and militias in Iraq, and the Assad regime in Syria, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen, that I will discuss it in details later. And on the other side, what we used to call the Saudi-led Sunni Arab coalition that represents the majority of the Arab states in the Middle East. But this is only one competition in the Middle East and the Red Sea region. The second one is Turkey and Qatar that are representing the Muslim Brotherhood that for a while was on the rise in Egypt and elsewhere in the Middle East, but in relatively short time were depressed. And Turkey with Erdogan, with his neo-Ottoman ambitions, as you can see in the headlines in the last period in northern Syria, but you will see later that it's not just in Syria, it's far beyond. This is the second inter-Islamic power that engaged in this competition. So, Shia, Sunni, represented by Iran and by Saudi Arabia, Muslim Brotherhood represented by the regional power of Turkey, the so-called moderate Arab Sunni represented by Saudi Arabia, to a lesser degree by Egypt, and the radical jihadi Salafi Islamic movement that, let's say, the symbol and the leader of this movement, thanks God and the US Special Forces, is not with us any longer, but the movement is still alive, strong, and I will relate to the threat of these radical jihadists later on. Oh. When I told you why it's so important as a maritime route, you can see here, for instance, for the, let's say, shipment from the UK to India, if they use the route through the Red Sea, this is the distance. And what is the alternative? This is the alternative. You can imagine how to translate it to figures regarding prices and what should be the effect. This is also the reason that when China, which is the emerging power in the relevant region, for China, the Red Sea is a key maritime route in what they call the Belt and Road Plan, or in other words, the so-called the modern Silk Road that is connecting China with the market in Western Europe. So after understanding the importance of the region, let's say, who composed what I call the Red Sea region? If I look at it from south to the north, it's starting with Somalia. Somalia is not indeed a part of the Red Sea, but it's unavoidable to include it because it's so close and relevant to the region. Then we can see Djibouti, Eritrea, Sudan, Egypt. This is the African coastline of the Red Sea. And Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. 9 countries, but it's not enough. We have to include, in order to understand the region, one of the main powers, in spite of the fact that it's a landlocked country, is of course Ethiopia. And without including Ethiopia in the analysis of the region, I think that any conclusion will be mistaken. It's a country with more than 100 million people, one of the most fast-growing economy in Africa, with significant political influence in all the rest of the East or Horn of Africa area. Now, what are the main shock points? First of all, what we call the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, narrow about 20 kilometers between Djibouti, Eritrea, and Yemen. This is the southern entrance to the Red Sea. The second is not strait, but the famous Suez Canal, that is the northern exit from the, or entrance, depends how we look at it, to the Red Sea region. And the third one, less important to the international geostrategic, but very important to two countries, Israel and Jordan, is the Strait of Tiran between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And for Jordan, Aqaba is the only access to sea. And for Israel, it's the only access to the Red Sea, and through the Red Sea to China, Japan, all the rest of Asia, which is more than important for the Israeli economy. When I speak about the importance of the Red Sea, I think that the best way to convince you that it's true is to look at a very small place near the Bab el-Mandeb named Djibouti. Let's say the territory of Djibouti is about 23,000 square kilometers, with about 800,000 people. In Djibouti, for decades, it was considered as a US center for influence in the region, with Camp Limonaire as the biggest US base in Africa of the US African Command. But they are not alone any longer. As I said before, about 4 kilometers from Camp Limonaire, the Chinese built their first military base out of the Chinese borders. And the Japanese, and the EU. France, of course, they were in Djibouti even before the Americans. And lately, Saudi Arabia. So imagine in such a small area, all these countries deployed military forces. Why? They decided to invest in this small place because of the most important strategic location of this place, with a clear understanding that in this region, it's not enough just to invest in the economy. You have to be capable to defend your interests, because the interests are challenged. Now, the problem is that when we look at the Red Sea region, unfortunately, this is one of the most unstable regions in the world. If I will just go along the different conflicts, most of the countries along the Red Sea region suffer either from internal problems. For instance, Sudan, a huge country along the coastline of the Red Sea. They had a dictator, Omar al-Bashir, for 30 years. He was ousted by a military coup in 11th of April this year. Since then, it's less stable than before. If we look at the history, current history of Sudan, genocide and ethnic cleansing in Darfur, ongoing uprising in the Kordofan region, They solved the problems between the north and the south just 5 years ago, but the tensions still exist. In the newborn or formed South Sudan, an ongoing civil war, and I can continue with the rest. So on one hand, internal problems. On the other hand, between almost all the countries, there are either territorial disputes or other disputes. Some of them, when I will speak about the good news, some of them were solved lately. But we have enough problems in the region that we have to take in consideration and to deal with. I would relate to two conflicts that, from my point of view, are the most sensitive and, let's say, the results of the way that these conflicts will end, the effects will far beyond the region. The first one is the war in Yemen. And we have to take in consideration that one of the mistakes, mainly in Europe, but to a certain degree in the US as well, that if we look at the war in Yemen as an internal Yemeni problem between the Shia Houthis and the central government of President Hadi, and the separatists in Aden, and Al-Qaeda in certain areas of Yemen. This is a very narrow way to understand what's going on. And of course, the Saudis as the bad guys, because they are intervened in this war. They took the side of the so-called central government of President Hadi. This is not the issue. And if we understand in a wider perspective what are the Iranian strategic goals, I think that it will lead to different conclusions. The Iranian long-standing vision since 1979 is to export the revolution to the rest of the Arab world, and if it's possible, the Muslim world. Our time is short, so I will go to the bottom lines. The Arab Spring gave Iran the golden opportunity to achieve this goal. And King Abdullah of Jordan was the first to use the term the Shia Crescent. What is behind this term? If you look at the map, here is Iran. Iraq, after 2003 and democratic elections, the Shia are the majority. So Iraq is dominated by the Shia, and a part of the Shia are very close to the Iranian policy. Then the war in Syria gave Iran the opportunity to direct intervention and presence on the soil of Syria. And of course in Lebanon, it's Hezbollah, which is the dominant power. So what we have here is the Shia Crescent, northern flank, but it's not the whole story. From geostrategic point of view, what are the goals of Iran? What are the main enemies of Iran? There are two. Israel on one hand, and Saudi Arabia on the other hand. So, what Iran tries to do after the success in the north, now they are going to the south. And their allies in the southern flank are the Houthis. So to make long story short, if I look at the Iranian involvement, it didn't start after 2010. It started much earlier. It's not just Iran, including Hezbollah. Hezbollah combatants and consultants are in Yemen supporting the Houthis. But Iran turned Yemen and the Houthis to a kind of laboratory, and they test many of the new doctrines and many of the advanced military assets in this theater. So I used to call the war in Yemen the forgotten war because nobody is interested in it. But almost every night, Saudi Arabia is attacked, not along the border, deep in Saudi Arabia, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, all by the Iranian support to the Houthis. So critic maritime route. When something happens here in Hormuz Strait, everybody on alert. When it happens here, it's hardly appeared on the fifth page in the newspaper. But the Houthis are using all the technique that in a future conflict Iran will use in larger scale here. Anti-ship missiles that they launch against both civilian and military targets, naval mines, remote controlled unmanned speedboats loaded with explosives against ships along the road. So the bottom line is that if we look at the Iranian vision, what they want to gain is the control of the Hormuz Strait and Bab el-Mandab Strait. If it will be achieved, the game is over. Saudi Arabia is contained from north, east, and south, and Iran controls the two critical straits for the oil and gas to Europe. This is the issue. All the rest is not really important. So I will move to another conflict that I think that it's even less known than the war in Yemen. As I said before, Ethiopia is the most important country in the continent, with demographic problems. I think that today there are more than 100 million people. They have problems with electricity, energy. So the Ethiopian government took the decision in 2007, but the implementation started in 2011, coincided with so-called Arab Spring, to build the biggest dam in the African continent on the Blue Nile. So far it's okay. It's important to the economic development of Ethiopia. When it will be ready, Ethiopia will become one of the main exporters of energy in Africa. So far so good. But the problem is that the downstream countries, to lesser degree Sudan, but mainly Egypt depends on 98% of the water, of drinking water, of the agriculture, the industry, on the Nile. And of course, the Egyptian concern is that the dam will affect the share of the water that will arrive to Egypt. So they started to negotiate almost in 2011. Now we are almost in 2020. In 2020, the Renaissance Dam will be almost ready. They plan to start to fill it. Behind the dam will be a huge reservation. But what is the main concern of Egypt? When it will be ready, let's say more or less the same quota of water will go downstream. But in the period of the filling, no water will come from the Blue Nile. And they unable to achieve an agreement regarding how many years it will take to the Ethiopians to fill. Ethiopia, of course, their interest is to do it as short as possible and to start to be benefited from the energy production. The Egyptian interest is, of course, to postpone it as much as possible. 2 weeks ago, the new elected Prime Minister of Ethiopia is the Nobel Prize winner for peace. And I will explain why. He really did a great job. But I was surprised to hear an announcement of the president that he said, for Ethiopia, the Renaissance Dam is critical, and if it's necessary to sacrifice millions of people, if war will happen, he is ready. And you can hear the same declarations from President Sisi. He said for Egypt, the Nile is a matter of life and death. So I hope that at least in the last moment they will find a solution. Otherwise, I think that these big powers of the region will contribute to a further serious crisis in the region. Terrorism. Unfortunately, when we look at this sensitive region, the most important stronghold of Al-Qaeda in the last decade is in Yemen. And with the war against the Houthis and so on in Yemen, they flourish. Because nobody pays attention to Al-Qaeda. More than it, Al-Qaeda is fighting alongside Saudi Arabia as a defense for Iranian users. So this is a big problem. The only party that is working all the time against Al-Qaeda is the United States from the base in Djibouti. From time to time you can hear they made a targeted killing of one leader, another leader, but it's of course not enough to change the situation here. And on the other side of the Bab el-Mandab in Somalia, this is the strongest Al-Qaeda stronghold in Africa. Shabaab, a local organization that became the African branch of Al-Qaeda. In the past, they controlled even Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. After intervention of the African Union, the AMISOM forces, they were forced out of Mogadishu and most of the big cities, but they are still holding about 20% of Somalia. And as Al-Qaeda branch, they are operating as well in Kenya and other countries in the region. You can see here the most sensitive area with a concentration of Al-Qaeda forces in the region. In the north, the branch of the Islamic State, the Sinai province of the group, they are in ongoing confrontation with the Egyptian forces since 2014. The Egyptian success is limited. I mean, they are unable to depress them. They're still there, and it's an ongoing confrontation for good, I think. In Somalia, of course, the war is going on. I think that Somalia is without a functioning regime since 1991, and I don't see that it's going to happen in the near future. Since time is short, I'm just running. Now, what we can see in the region, because of the different conflicts and the terror threat and so on, this is a new picture. Because in the past, we had the Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen. As a result of the war in Yemen and the competition between Saudi Arabia and its coalition and Iran, in the past, Sudan was a main ally of Iran. Eritrea was open to Iranian military forces. They used the Assab port for the Iranian navy. Iran had a presence in Somalia. One of the biggest achievements of the Saudi coalition is that they convinced all the countries here to cut the diplomatic relations with Iran. And the result was that, for instance, the United Arab Emirates built military bases in Eritrea. And they used these bases to operations in Yemen. Saudi Arabia built military bases in Djibouti. And they operate from there in Yemen. United Arab Emirates are present in Somalia. But as I told you before, it's a reflection of the overall conflicts in the Middle East. So who else is newcomer in the region? The alliance of Turkey and Qatar are in competition with Egypt on one hand and in competition with Saudi Arabia. So in 2018, President Erdogan with his Minister of Defense and Chief of Staff arrived to Sudan and signed a contract to rebuild. There is an island not far from the Saudi Arabian coastline. It's called Suakin, that in the Ottoman period it was a port city. And they signed an agreement that they will rebuild this historical site, but as well a naval base for the Turkish Navy. Turkey is very active in Somalia. They are training the Somalia national forces. Qatar is paying for all this Turkish initiative. So if you look at this map, you can understand that the whole region is full with new military activities that reflect the interests of the different parties. And if I look at it from a different way of analysis, in the book, I call it the Arab Red Sea. Because let's see what is the reality. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Somalia, Djibouti, Sudan, all are members of the Arab League. All of them actually, if we look at the Saudi Arabian coalition against the Houthis, they are part of the coalition. And most of them, they have common interests to keep the influence of the region. In last year, they formed first time a regional new security organization. The name is so long, so I have to read it. But it's the Arab and African Coastal States and the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden coalition. And 1 month ago, they made the second military exercise, naval exercise of all the participants, who are not included in, I mean, they are Red Sea region countries, but they are not included in this coalition. Israel, Eritrea, and Ethiopia. So as long as we have the common interests with, let's say, the Saudi Arabian coalition, it's okay. But if we look a little bit back to the history, Israel fought 3 wars for the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea in the past. We have to hope that for long we will be in very good relations and so on. But I would like to finish it with some, let's say, more positive developments. First of all, some of the long conflicts were solved. Ethiopia ended the conflict with Eritrea. They signed a peace agreement. Eritrea ended the conflict with Djibouti. They settled the problems. And some other conflicts regarding Somalia were solved as well. I think that one important development that makes me a little bit more optimistic is the huge investments of all the parties in the region. And I will just mention briefly some of them. Egypt. Egypt built the new Suez Canal. It's a kind of parallel canal that shortened significantly the time of crossing the Suez Canal from north to south and vice versa. It was a huge project, and along this area they are developing a commercial area, and they encourage investment and so on. Egypt, under President Sisi, is going to mega projects. For instance, they are building a new administrative capital east of Cairo, and huge investments. Another very significant initiative, it's not yet in process, but Egypt and Saudi Arabia signed an agreement to build the King Salman Bridge over the Tiran Strait that will connect Sinai with Saudi Arabia. So it will be the first bridge between Africa and Asia. I'm not speaking about Israel that could be a bridge, but for political reasons it is not used. But of course it has a strategic influence, and of course for the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, it will be a real important development. Another huge project is the future city of Neom. Saudi Arabia is going to invest many billions of dollars in this area, and they will make joint ventures with Jordan and Egypt. So again, a regional project that can contribute to the well-being of the people in the region. I mentioned the Renaissance Dam, and almost along all the Red Sea, all the existing ports are in development process, and many new locations, China, United Arab Emirates and others are building new ports. So why am I optimistic? Because I think that for many parties in the region, they have more to lose. And this can contribute to stabilize in some way the region. So to summarize it and to leave some time for Q&A, the Red Sea region is at a crossroad. And what will be the direction that we will see in the coming year? I think according to the experience in the Middle East, in our region, it will be too risky to try to predict. So I think it will give a lot of materials to scholars in the future to analyze and to write about the development. So I suggest that we'll ask if you have questions, and please.
Just a couple of comments. The people in Yemen, the Houthis, are not really Shia. They are Zaidi. And Zaidi broke away from Shia hundreds of years ago and are recognized. It's a very common mistake. Even the New York Times blows it on a daily basis. Second thing, a lot of the technology being used by the Houthis is really embedded Quds Force guys. Houthis are not exactly high-tech guerrilla operations, so clearly Iran is doing more than puppeteering. They're actually on the ground launching some of these things. The third thing about capturing both of the straits, brilliant insight. I think you're exactly right. I think there's one other equally weighted motive for Iran. They would love to have a port, a base on the Saudi border, awaiting for the holy day in which the Saudi family, royal family, falls apart, and finally their destiny of controlling the holy places becomes a reality. My question, when these outside nations are dealing with northern Somalia, are they dealing with the central government, or are they dealing with Somaliland and Puntland administrations, both of which would desperately love to break away from Somalia, both of which have much stronger economies than Somalia?
Okay. First of all, of course you are right. The Houthis, the Houthi Shia school is different from the Iranian 12er Shia school. But it's not important. Iran is supporting Sunnis, so why not to support other Shia? I mean, for Iran, any party who is ready to follow the interests of Iran is welcome. This is one point. The second one, what we see in Yemen is exactly what Iran is doing, for instance, for long with Hezbollah. There are two ways to improve the military capabilities. One is to provide the complete system, the hardware, and just to teach them how to operate. The second, which Iran preferred, is to deliver the technology, to deliver the components that are not available in Beirut or in Sada, but to help them to produce, or at least to assemble, drones, missiles, and so on, by their own. So all the time when they are blamed that they are proxies of Iran and they are using Iranian equipment, their argument is no. It's produced here in Yemen, and it's partly true, not completely true. So this is the second point. Regarding Somalia, I think that because of the weakness of the central regime in Mogadishu, almost all the parties, without formal recognition, are negotiating with Somaliland and Puntland. Russia is negotiating with Somaliland to open a military naval base. Okay, so let's say all the rules according to the traditional system that all the countries in the world recognize only the Somalian government doesn't work any longer. They are negotiating. Ethiopia is working to open a port in Somaliland. United Arab Emirates want to develop in Puntland. everything is different today. Yeah. Any other question? Please.
I'd just like to hear a little more of your views about the Emirates' motivations and resources to make those motivations reality.
Okay, and you have also a question?
I was going to ask for you to elaborate a little more on Somaliland as basically an independent actor from Somalia.
Okay. Let me start with this is the easier question. If I look at Somaliland, I think that it's amazing because compared to the rest of Somalia, they succeeded more or less from 1991 onwards to be out of the bloodshed and famine and all the disasters of Somalia, and even to have a kind of democratic system. Let's say more democratic than many other systems around. And in spite of this fact, because of the, let's say, international tradition, no countries agreed to recognize Somaliland as an independent state. But practically they are functioning as an independent state. I think that the last several years, because of this tremendous competition between external forces in the region, they don't care any longer about this traditional policy, and they are ready to make business with Somaliland. So I think that for them it's a golden period to develop, and even if not formally, but de facto recognized as a semi-independent country. It's interesting to see that Prime Minister Abiy from Ethiopia, he is in process to negotiate or help negotiation between the Somali government and Somaliland, and he hosted a tripartite meeting in Addis, and it seems that they are ready to find a kind of solution. Again, your question, would you like to focus it more?
No,
because it's huge.
I'd really like to hear your views on it. You didn't spend a lot of time on the Emirates, and obviously they're becoming much more active all the way across North Africa.
You mean about Yemen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so if we look at Yemen, I think that there are two main perspectives that we have to take in consideration. One is the Saudi, and the second is the Iranian Houthi. For Saudi Arabia, Yemen is the backyard, traditionally. And again, I think that very little attention was paid for the problems between Yemen and Saudi Arabia for long. But the Houthi problem didn't start now. Actually, if you read in the books, you will find that they are talking about the 6 Sada wars. The rebellion started in 2004, and between 2004 and 2009, they fought 6 wars. The last war, in 2009, the Houthis first time attacked Saudi Arabian positions along the border. And Saudi Arabia, of course, intervened, and it ended with a kind of ceasefire. Since then, since 2009, Saudi understood that they have a real problem. Not just problem of Al-Qaeda, they succeeded to, I don't have enough time, but if I look at this stronghold of Al-Qaeda in Yemen, it's a result of the Saudi Arabian success to depress the Al-Qaeda branch in Saudi Arabia. And this success in 2004, 2006 forced Al-Qaeda to relocate to Yemen, which was weaker with limited capabilities, and they were able to build up this stronghold. But from the Saudi point of view, this was not the main challenge. The main challenge was a lesson learned from the 2000 Saudi war. What was the result? Again, I'm not sure that anybody heard about it. The border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia is about 2,000 kilometers. You try to build the fence with Mexico. They built a fence along the border with Yemen. It doesn't mean that it helps a lot, especially not now. But for Yemen, it's necessary as a part of the strategic vision to be in control over Yemen. Because otherwise, it will turn to be a front line, a direct threat on Saudi Arabia and on Saudi Arabian interests regarding, for instance, the freedom of navigation in Bab el-Mandeb. The policy or the strategy of MBS is more proactive than ever before. And from the moment that they took the decision to intervene in 2015, they cannot go out from this war without certain achievements. They cannot. On the other hand, Iran, as I said before, the Iranian inspirations are, the sky is the limit. I mean, on one hand, they are going to the ancient theological competition between the Shia and the Sunni and the depression of the Shia since the Battle of Karbala and so on, and to regain for the Shia the leading position in the Muslim world. This is theory. What is practice? If I take from 1979 the Khomeini doctrine, he considered from the very beginning the Iranian revolution is not local, it's not Persian, it's an Islamic revolution. The name of the state is the Islamic State. They look themselves as the leading of the true Islam. And of course, if I follow in this theological level, who is the leader of the Muslims? The one who is holding the holy places of the Islam. So what is the name of the Saudi royal regime? The custodians of the holy mosques. The Iranians want to be the custodian of the holy mosque. When you look at the manifest of Hezbollah, what are the long-standing goals of Hezbollah? And Hezbollah was formed by Iran. It's a pure Iranian proxy, of course, with Lebanese orientation.
Take control of the third holy place.
Exactly. I mean, what was the vision? To take control over Mecca and Medina, I think that it will be really an earthquake in the Muslim history, because at the end, the majority, 85%, maybe more, are Sunni. and they will never accept that Shia will control Mecca and Medina. So what left? Al-Aqsa. So if you look at the goals of Hezbollah, they are practical people. So it was to liberate South Lebanon from the Israeli occupation in the long run, to try to form Lebanon into the model of the Islamic Republic, and to liberate Jerusalem. This is the vision. So now take this vision, translate it to practical policy of using force and proxies and alliances. As I said before, on the northern flank, it's quite successful. In the southern flank, it's more problematic. So there are two enclaves of Shia that Iran tried to use in the past. One is in Bahrain, and the second unfortunately, in the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, in the most oil-rich area, the majority of the population are Shia. So from time to time, those who are monitoring the area, you can see that there are some terror attacks and arrests and so on. But the main concentration of potential allies are in Yemen. So it's logical, according to the vision of Iran, that they will try to reach Yemen, and by doing this, they will contain all their enemies in between. Any further questions? Is it okay with the time?
Yeah, one more question.
One more,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, my question about the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden coalition. If we look to this coalition now, it's like a political coalition more than well-functioning strategic. So what's your prediction about the future functionality of this coalition?
You speak about the coalition that I mentioned here because there are some overlapping coalitions. For instance, when in 2015 Saudi Arabia intervened in Yemen, they formed a coalition of 10 countries. Many of the countries are from the Red Sea region. Now in 2018, they formed a specific alliance that I mentioned before that include only Red Sea region countries. I think that it's a part of a process that even the United States is involved, let's say 2 years ago, but it was again on the table in the Warsaw meeting 2 years ago, what is called, I want to be precise, the name is a Middle East Strategic Alliance, or MESA, and it's better known as the Arab NATO. This is an American initiative. I think that Secretary Pompeo is one of the leadings of this initiative to build regional alliances backed by the United States, but this alliance in the future will enable to reduce the direct American involvement in the region. They will be strong enough to maintain their interests by themselves. I think that the countries in the region understand that the United States is less interested in involvement in the region. Not selling arms. I mean, the deal with Saudi Arabia is one of the best. You have to take in consideration that Saudi Arabia is the second biggest arms importer in the world. And the United Arab Emirates is the third one. Okay, so nobody wants to lose such a market. But it doesn't mean that American troops should be deployed in Yemen or in Syria or in Iraq. And with this understanding, the local countries are concerned. And they try to initiate potential alternatives. To tell you that I'm looking at this alliance as something reliable that will be operational in the short term, of course not. But it reflects a way of thinking, a way of reflection of the concerns of the countries in the region. And in the book, and to finish this discussion, I think that the US has to take the lead, because without real support from the United States, Saudi Arabia and the coalition will lose the war in Yemen. And later on, you can see how difficult it is to the United States to deal with Iran in the Persian Gulf. It will be the same there. So it's better to invest now. It's cheap. It doesn't demand a lot. Than to leave it for the future with much higher price. So our time is over, so thank you for listening.